For those of you who know me well, you know that I have very mixed emotions about social media. What started out in Facebook as a wonderful way for family and friends to share photos and significant life events or life milestones is now a way to post, "I'm having a cup of coffee." So? Or this one, "I just had dinner and now I want to throw up." I'm really not making that up. I do have a Facebook friend who every time she eats, she feels the need to post her daily gastronomical intake and reaction. Rest assured, it's none of you who are here present. But I think social media has lured us into the schizophrenic world in which we want to tell everyone all the time what I'm doing. And yet we want to be part of the crowd. We want to be part of the group. Maybe this is really nothing new in human history. We yearn to be part of a group. We learn to be one of everyone else, the crowd, yet we yearn, we demand even to be an individual. You see this on Facebook, where people change their profile picture to be like everyone else, to be part of a group. And just as quickly, the status updates declare, "Don't tell me what to think." I believe that all cultures have wrestled with this tension. How do I live with others while maintaining my own sense of self? The church has not been immune from that wrestling and conversation. The church, the Catholic Church, the small c Catholic Church, the Church Universal is made up of hundreds of millions of people, and at the same time we declare that we are a larger part of something greater than all the parts. But then we surely want to glorify the individual parts in ourselves. And for some of us in our culture, we turn to the ultimate individual and narcissist, Oprah. If you don't believe me, go look at the magazine covers for the past decade. Every single cover has her picture on it. How do we celebrate community and yet value and recognize who we are individually, parts of a larger sum, yet all called by a different name, and yet called the same as children of God? In just a few moments, we will baptize these very unique expressions of God's image into a community much, much larger than their small bodies. When I met with these parents and godparents recently in a baptism class, I shared something from a book written by Will Willimon. Will Willimon is a former professor and dean of the chapel at Duke Divinity School. He now happens to be a United Methodist bishop in Alabama. He's written numerous and wonderful books. He's considered one of the best preachers in America. And as I met with these parents and godparents, I shared with them a passage from Willimon's book entitled Peculiar Speech. Peculiar Speech. And in this book, Willimon makes the case that preaching to those who are baptized, those who preach to those who are baptized, really do use peculiar speech. We are a very peculiar community. We are not an exclusive club, to be sure, but we as church are called to act and live in very peculiar ways. Willimon notes in this book that on one occasion he was leading a church conference, and after a panel discussion, a young man approached him and said, "I'm a baptized Episcopalian, and none of you have the right to tell me who I am. I define myself. I define myself." Sounds like an Episcopalian. Willimon says that if his first statement were true, that I am a baptized Episcopalian, then his second was utterly false. For in baptizing, the church is quite clear, or at least should be quite clear, that we are telling all of you who you are, namely a cherished child of God who is washed, gifted, chosen, and called. You have an identity. We tell you who you are. You are all children of God. And so we who preach from the Bible. We preach what we have been told. We make visible in our preaching the result of not what we necessarily want to preach, but we have the book from the church. That is what we preach from. And that book is born out of a community. It's not just simply what I want to make up. It is born out of a community. And so tonight, in just a moment at baptism, we assert and use very peculiar speak that you have a certain identity, and that identity challenges and endangers all the other identities in this world. That identity challenges every other identity you have in this world. Willimon rightly says, when we do this, the texts from which we preach have very few allies in the world. The modern church has been willing to use everyone else's language but its own. We have a tendency sometimes to translate it into something more palatable. As Willimon says so well, we translate it into something more palatable to people who use Cuisinarts. And so for the conservative among us, the gospel speech is traded for dogmatic assertions and a simple moralism, usually taken out of context. And the more liberals among us talk tiptoes around Christian discourse, and it can end up being some innocuous affirmation of the ruling order. Unable to preach Christ and Him crucified, we may preach humanity and it improved. To all of you parents, godparents, I would not be living into my vocation. I would do you a disservice if I were to skip past these very difficult questions that you are about to be asked. I would be doing a disservice to all of you who are present. I would be missing my vocation if I were to skip past all of these tough questions that will be asked of all of you. They're very peculiar questions to remind us that we are very peculiar people. We're not a club. We're not meant to be exclusive, far from that. And in one of those questions you will hear asked of all of you, which may be the most difficult question, will you strive for justice and respect the dignity of every human being? Will you strive for justice and respect the dignity of every human being? They are peculiar questions for people who have a very peculiar identity. And yet, I realize at the same time, they are tough questions. They are tough questions when you really think about it. And that's why I think the prayer book has it right. And those words which maybe are the best that we can hope for, maybe these words are the best we can hope for, and surely it is the very best we can say with these very difficult, peculiar questions, trying to find our peculiar identity in this world as children of God. Perhaps what we can say at the end of this night is still the very best thing. I will, with God's help.